Welcome to Conversations with Big Rich. This is an interview-style podcast. These interviewed are all involved in the off-road industry. Being involved, like all of my guests are, is a lifestyle, not just a job. I talk to past, present, and future legends, as well as business owners, employees, media, and land use warriors. Men and women who have found their way into this exciting and addictive lifestyle we call off-road. We discuss their personal history, struggles, successes, and reboots. We dive into what drives them to stay active in off-road. We all hope to shed some light on how to find a path into this world that we live and love and call off-road.
Whether you're crawling the Red Rocks of Moab or hauling your toys to the trail, Maxxis has the tires you can trust for performance and durability. 4 wheels or 2. Maxxis tires are the choice of champions because they know that whether for work or play, for fun or competition, Maxxis tires deliver. Choose Maxxis. Tread victoriously.
Have you seen 4Low Magazine yet? 4Low Magazine is a high-quality, well-written, four-wheel drive-focused magazine for the enthusiast market. If you still love the idea of a printed magazine, something to save and read at any time, 4Low is the magazine for you. 4Low cannot be found in stores, but you can have it delivered to your home or place of business. Visit 4lowmagazine.com to order your subscription today. On today's episode of Conversations with Big Rich is Clyde Bynum. Clyde is the owner of Spyder Off-Road, promoter of the National Rock Racing Association, which is the home of the Bouncers, and a one-time mini truck enthusiast. We'll find out more about all that. But Clyde, thank you for coming on board and spending some time with us and talking about your life.
I appreciate it, Rich. I feel honored to be a part of the show.
Okay, well, let's get to the first question, which is always pretty much the easiest for most people. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in North Mississippi, actually born in Memphis, Tennessee, which is right on the border, and grew up in North Mississippi on the same 2.5 acres that I'm still on.
Oh, wow. Okay. And what were those early years like? Were you playing as a kid, hanging out in the garage, or what was going on?
So yeah, in my early days, I grew up on a junkyard. Of pretty much any kind of car you could imagine. My dad was self-employed with a shop, and I would just go out there and tinker with stuff. And in my early teen years, I would bolt things together and make things run and use them as toys. I was always a off-roader since the day I was born, I believe.
Excellent. And that junkyard shop, is that still in the family?
So it went away when I was still very young, probably, young teenager.
Okay.
My dad had stepped out and became a truck driver for, I'd say 5, 6, 7 years. I really don't remember the time frame. And then went to work for a Mercedes dealership. So no, it's hasn't been around in, I guess, 35 years.
Okay. I've always wanted a junkyard. Or I wanted to be able to collect vehicles at least.
Well, you know what? Ironically, that's now back to where it's at. He later in life opened up his own Mercedes repair place, and there's hundreds of Mercedes sitting around my shop at all times, which to me are in the way. But yeah, he collects old cars, and they're piled up everywhere around the shop.
Okay. And school years, were you a good student? Or were you indifferent?
I would say I was a good student. I was one of those kids that stuck to myself, didn't care what other people thought of me, just like today. And I just enjoyed having a good time. I didn't really like school, but I didn't hate school. It was just part of the process, I guess you say. But I was able to get through it without a lot of studying. It was easy for me.
Okay. Did you participate in any school activities, band or sports or anything like that?
I actually did band for 6 years, from 6th grade all the way to graduation. Played the trumpet.
Okay.
Most people probably never knew that. It's probably one of the reasons I ended up disliking football or most sports, to be honest with you, because I was stuck going to them and didn't want to be there later in life.
Did you play with band? So your marching band at the games. Did you participate in any? Did they have your school have any like jazz band or anything like that you participated in?
No, it was just strictly marching band, and then of course, we had the normal band competitions throughout the year. And I was decent at it. I was never going to become a professional, you know, instrument player, but I was decent at it, and it passed the time.
Okay. And back then, what kind of activities did the family do? Any camping or anything like that, or was it just pretty much the grind?
It was pretty much the grind. I mean, I would still do things, and we would do our annual vacation somewhere in the world, usually somewhere within a couple hours, 3 or 4 hours of home. My dad wasn't a big traveler. Honestly, we didn't have the funds to be a big traveler back in those days. My dad, just like me, he kind of started from scratch and got to those points later in life. But he to this day, he's still not a big traveler. So we mainly just did the grind and had fun close to home.
And if you're still on the same property, does that mean that friends that you had back in the day? I know you said you were kind of, more of a hang to yourself, but any friends that still in your life from back then?
Oh yeah, I did hang to myself, but I did have my few friends, and I'm still, friends with those people. One of them, a guy named Pat Hardison, I was friends with back then, but not close friends. And then we later in life became really good friends 4 or 5 years ago. Most people that pay attention to national news would know him as the only human that ever had a face transplant.
Oh, wow.
So I've got a few childhood friends that still do what we do, and we'll get together every now and then, go do an off-road trail or whatever.
So back then, you said you tinkered with things and put things together to drive them or ride them or whatever. What were some of the things that you built?
Probably the first thing that I was able to accomplish, I'd say I was probably 12 years old, 13 years old. I had found a Volkswagen out there in the junkyard and pulled the top off of it. And, most people know that they're just a flat pan and everything's bolted to that flat pan. So I took one of those old Volkswagens and pulled the top off and mounted the steering wheel, and never could find a good starter for it. So I'd always had to push it off or have some friends that would help me push it off. And we'd go out and go play in the mud until we got stuck and push it again until we could get it running again and do it again.
That's awesome. And after that, what did you build your first car, or did you find something else?
I did not build my first car. My parents gave me, I guess it was probably like a 1972 240D Mercedes. Obviously wasn't anything nice, even though it was a Mercedes. It was worth, $500 probably. That was my first car, just old diesel, wasn't even a turbo, and slow as Christmas and the same color as a penny. About as ugly a car as you could imagine. That was my first car. And then when I got a little older and was able to pay for things myself, which I was able to do around 15 or 16, I ended up with an 88 Toyota pickup truck. That kind of began my years into the mini trucking and lowrider industry.
Okay. Let's talk about how you were able to afford that vehicle on your own. Did you have jobs that you worked, or what kind of things were you doing?
Yeah, I was pretty motivated early on. It's hard for a lot of people to keep up with me as far as those kinds of things, because the truth is I enjoy work. So when I was 13, 14 years old, I had business cards, and I was doing my own installs for alarms and car stereo in my parents' driveway, and that was kind of my first start of making money. Back when I was 11 is when I started working a fireworks stand, which was twice a year. But the truth is, you make really good money those 2 times. And then the day I turned 15, I started my first real job at a grocery store called Piggly Wiggly, and was there for 4 years.
A good old Piggly Wiggly, huh?
Good old Piggly Wiggly.
Excellent.
And even in the summers, I would work at a factory with my granddaddy called Alta Formers, which of course also owned, to this day is known as Memphis Audio, which was probably another part of the car stereo world.
So that just kind of came naturally then, is being around the stereo systems and.
It was stuff that interests me. Like I had my own stereo and I was building my own boxes with just 6x9s and the little stuff. And, it grew into rigs that were 1615s or 1612s and 418s. It grew into the really big competitor side of things and show car side of things. And that just kept developing until it was, in the full blown custom mini trucks.
Okay. That Toyota that you talked about, was that was a 2-wheel drive?
It was a 2-wheel drive. Yep. Lowered it in the driveway, just, learning the hard way.
Cutting springs and.
Well, the Toyotas luckily were torsion bars, so you just turned the torsion bars down on the front and put lowering blocks in the back because they were naturally spring under in those days.
Okay. And how much time did you spend on that particular truck?
I don't remember the details, but I think I had that truck for a couple of years before it got wrecked. And then I bought a Mazda extended cab, and I probably went through 3 trucks in my teenage years. One of the second one, I'd actually bought a Mazda, and it lasted like a month before somebody hit me head on and totaled it. So that truck was a short life. But anything I've ever bought, I've usually hung on to for a long time unless something else took it away from me.
Okay. And the craze or the passion to build, modify, fix up, that sounds like something that's always been there.
Yeah, it's been there since the beginning. Like I said, I would go out there and tinker with stuff in the junkyard and try to have fun. And I've always been a person that's self-taught everything I've ever done. It's always a joke of jack of all trades, master of none type thing.
Right. There's quite a few of us that are that way.
Yeah.
Especially on the promoter side of it. I don't know why, but it just seems like we gravitate toward that.
Yep.
So during the mini truck phase, you were competing in it's car stereo, the stereotype wars, or what was the whole thing with the mini trucks?
In the early days, it was more of the car stereo thing. It just happened to be I had a truck when I started. And then as the industry grew, which the truth is most of the industries, especially in those days, seemed to always start in the West Coast and work its way back. I was one of the few that never stuck to the trends and was always out, doing my own thing and trying something different that nobody else was messing with. And in the beginning, it was more of the car stereo side of things. And then it slowly became into body modification, shaving door handles. And by the end, my shop in the beginning was called Silver Star Audio, and it kind of transformed into Silver Star Audio and Customs, and then it became Silver Star Customs, which is where most of the industry or most of the world knew me as, was Silver Star Customs, building mini trucks.
And you building mini trucks for others with Silver Star Customs?
Yes, it was actually my main business for, and the truth is it's still the same business. But we focused on mini trucks until about 10 years ago. Honestly, it was me and a couple of friends that from high school that I'd hired, and that was what we did. And there were some years we would make it to 45 plus shows a year from New York to California. And it was all passion driven. It was never something that was going to make good money, to be honest with you, but it took me a long time in life to learn that the hard way.
So then, the mini trucks, did you promote any of your own events or any local shows or anything like that?
Yeah, we just kind of coincidentally, again, I was never really into sports at all my whole life, but coincidentally I became good friends with a local professional hockey team, and we started doing a local show annually called the Shootout, because that was a part of hockey, and it was to help raise money for a charity that one of my good friends had called Parsons Pledge. So we would do an annual show. We did that for like 3 or 4 or 5 years. I don't remember the details, but we would do that to help raise money for a charity. And that was probably the extent of doing my own promotion of shows. You know, I've never, to be honest with you, I've never considered myself a promoter. I'm more of a fabricator and like to tinker with things.
Okay. And then Silver Star, there was a transition or a morph in. I guess it still stands on its own 2 legs, but became Spider.
Well, so that's a funny story. It was always both, and it wasn't both on purpose. And the reason the Spider name was used, it was nothing to do with me caring about spiders. When I built Silver Star Customs, back in those days, every custom shop in the world used flames of some sort as their trademark or logo or whatever. And I didn't want to be like that. Like, I wanted something totally different that would fit across the board. You know, I like to look at things as bigger pictures, you know, 5, 10 years down the road. And spider webs, I knew I could always use as, you know, gussets on things or any kind of lay into anything that I was building in the stereo world or whatever. But there were companies, for instance, like Viair compressors, which fit both sides. They're in the mini trucking world and they're in the off-road world. But they required me to have 2 different websites to sell both sides of their products. One example is like the tanks and things like that. We weren't allowed to sell to the mini truckers for the simple fact that they were going to abuse it and overpressure the tanks and put people in jeopardy. So I wasn't allowed to sell the tanks and things to the Silver Star Customs customers, but I needed to be able to sell onboard air compressors and kits like that to the off-road side. So the truth is, that's the only reason that I had both. I had a Spider Off-Road website and a Silver Star Customs website strictly for that reason. And as I mentioned before, Silver Star and Build Mini Trucks, the truth is it was never big money. You know, it was 100, 120 plus hour weeks working till you fell asleep. Then you woke up the next morning in the same spot and just kept working. Spider Off-Road kind of became more dominant just out of necessity for that reason when I started doing the series. In the custom world, it's not something that you can really teach people. So it was becoming more of bolt-on products, which was more of the off-road side of things, the Spider off-road side of things, so that I could focus on the series a little more is kind of how it developed and formed.
So how did you get involved with the bouncing world? I know it's a different style of off-road.
So
hill killers, bouncers, whatever you want to call them.
So climbing hills is something I've done since the days of the 3-wheeler, which, you know, these days, I don't even know how many people realize that's where it all started back then. But I had a 3-wheeler back in the day, and hill killing and hill climbing was just something that I've always done through everything I've ever built. You know, I went from 3-wheelers to 4-wheelers to rail buggies to Jeeps to UTVs. I've done it all, and hill climbing has always been what I enjoy. It was always something that I was good at. You know, when we would just go out and ride, it was usually me or maybe one other buddy that would conquer the hill that we were trying to conquer. You know, it was just always what I enjoyed doing, pushing my boundaries on hill climb. The series started, to be honest with you, to support off-road parks. At that point in time, I would go to a lot of off-road parks just to ride. And the truth was, it was also, the off-road industry was where I got away from the hustle and bustle, because it got to a point when I was at car shows, you know, everybody wanted to talk to me. And I've never put myself on a pedestal. I've never felt like I was any different than anybody else. And I didn't enjoy that. The truth is, that's one of the reasons I've always done everything I could to stay off camera, because it wasn't like I felt like I belonged there. So hill climbing just was what I love. And off-road parks, I would see the struggle that they would have to survive. You know, it's kind of like the same struggle the West Coast has with public lands. Over here, we have private property parks, but they struggle to survive. You know, insurance costs and all that stuff that makes it hard. So at the same time, I seen the rock bouncing industry starting to become a thing. And at the time, it was only, I'd say there were less than only 7 or 8 rock bouncers that truly existed at that time. You know, Bobby Tanner, Randall Key, Richie Keith. A few of those guys were the guys that were always on Mad Ram 11 or Busted Knuckle. And I would see them responding to their fan base about there was nowhere to watch it. It was private property, no public watch available or whatever. And I kept, in the back of my mind for like a year or two, I kept thinking I could kill two birds with one stone. If I could figure out how to get these rock bouncers into an environment that would bring them to Hot Springs Off-Road Park, which was my favorite park at the time, bring them there, and that would help keep this park open. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, if I create a series that draws them in close to their home, then we build the finals at Hot Springs that would get them across the river, get them to travel. It would create some safety and some organization to a sport that I seen was coming, whether I was involved or not. And that's how it started. I mean, it was literally just to try to bring traffic and attention to off-road parks so that they could continue to grow and stay there.
And your first series was the Southern Rock Racing, correct?
Yeah, Southern Rock Racing was, and I had when I first started, I bought all the domain names, and I had a vision of where it was going to go. But the truth is, the SRS logo in the Southern Rock Racing region blew up way faster than I anticipated, and to this day still blows my mind how fast it grew. So it became like the logo that everybody knew, the name that everybody knew, and I'm like, okay, so in my mind, I thought it was going to go down as the people in the South were going to race in the South, the people in the Central would race in the Central, people in the North would race in the North, and then at some point we were going to have this Super Bowl style event where the winners of those regions would come together into one big event. But it didn't go that way. All of them were racing all the events. I'm like, okay. So I started to adapt and focus more on the name National Rock Racing because that's just the way the drivers and the fans were seeing it. And, it just took time to get that to be noticed because the SRS logo just exploded and the sport exploded so fast.
Were you the first organized bouncer competitions?
Yes. Yeah, I'd started putting it together late 2010, early 2011. I was tinkering with the truth is I still wasn't sure how to do it. To this day, I don't know how to do it. So I had seen a guy put together this on Hardline, and I was on Pirate and all that back in the day too. But there was a forum called Hardline. You may be familiar with it, but
yes,
there was a guy on there that had done this challenge for UTVs to climb a hill down in Alabama at Choccolocco. So and I knew UTVs were also starting to become a thing, and I was like, well, I'll probably have two classes, one for the rock bouncers and one for the UTVs because they're starting to get there. And at the time, they were just 800s. So I seen this challenge. He was looking for people to put up money to make it happen. I sent him a message and said, hey, I'd like to throw some money at it. I don't want any recognition. I don't want anything. It was, in my mind, was like a test dummy thing to see if the market was really there to go for building a series. And so I did. And a lot of people showed up. Dozens of UTVs showed up to, climb this hill that to this day doesn't make sense at all. And it went great. Big crowd showed up. I'm like, okay, I've been tinkering with this for a while. It's time to pull the trigger. So I start putting together the plans. I start contacting parks. And at that time, we were getting really close to announce. And then out of nowhere, an event called Gorilla Run pops up. And so I'm like, well, good. Somebody else is going to do it. I don't have to worry about it. And I'd offered, and then I seen where they were going to run bouncers on a trail called Greg's Rocks, which is more of a rock crawl trail. And so I'd shot them a message. I didn't know any of them. Shot them a message and offered to kind of give them some ideas on the hill climb side of things. And anyway, the rest is history. It was the first organized series. And it's, been here finished up 13 years in the next few weeks.
Very good. And that the first event that you did that was yours, not the one at Choccolocco. Well, first of all, what hill at Choccolocco did they use, and why do you say it was crazy?
I should be able to tell you that hill, but I picture it, but I cannot think of the name of it.
It's okay.
Next time, next to it was called Showtime, and I cannot remember the name of that hill. But I mean, the reason it was gnarly was because of how long it was. It was a situation where if it went bad, you were going to cartwheel multiple times back to the bottom. And back in those days, a Razor 800 was a stock cage. Wasn't known to take those kind of tumbles, and um, that was also back in those days. I was also building and fabricating razor cages and things like that. So that was where kind of the razor craze, rock bouncer craze started as well. I built one for my son out of a 900, and we went down to an event at Grey Rock, which is where Cable Hill is, that the whole rock bouncer world knows of. It's just the most popular hill people want to run. We went down there, and CJ, my son, ended up doing some crazy things in his UTV 900 with a crazy looking rock bouncer spider web cage, and it kind of became known pretty quick and became a kind of a genre of its own thing, like you're saying. And it's rock bouncer look, which everybody does totally different.
Right.
Instead of a uniform vehicle, it's kind of still that way. It's not like a uniform spec that has ever been followed. It's always been about, I guess it's kind of like Monster Jam. It's always been about the name of the buggy and looking totally different than everything else.
True. Very true. So what was the first event that you did as Southern, or the National Rock Racing Association? What was where was that held?
It was held at Choccolocco in Alabama. And in the first year, the UTVs weren't involved in the bouncer race like they were, or the bouncer event. They were totally separate events. And so we had 4 bouncer events and 4 UTV events throughout that year, which was a total of 8 events. And that was in 2012. Like I'd mentioned before, there was only, in my mind, 7 or 8 true rock bouncers that existed, but we ended up with, I think, 18, and I still got a picture on my phone. We ended up with 18 people showing up to compete. Bree Molitor and her dad had showed up just to, film it and do it as far as the 4x4 Nation that they were doing back then. And of course, Trip was part of it back then. Trip Pullen, that a lot of people know. He was with us back then and used to travel all the events with me. He ends up talking her into racing. Of course, he became, stuck in it and kept with it, and to this day is still helping us. But yeah, it was at Choccolocco. Ended up with 3 times as many rigs as I expected, and we just kept trying to figure out how to keep it going and honestly figure out how to grow with it, and find support to make it work. So it's been mind-boggling how fast it's grown.
And one of the things that I was amazed at is the spectator turnout. A little different with rock crawling, or even with like the Ultra 4 events or KOH, where everything takes place in one area, and it's not spread out, and it's like one at a time. And as long as you get the recoveries going fast enough, which, if when you're hill killing, everything rolls to the bottom, hopefully anyway.
Most times.
Most of the time.
Trees create some situations that are pretty tough to deal with every now and then.
Right.
But we've learned over the last decade.
Right. And so I was weighing that spectator show that you're trying to put on, which is, you got the hill, you got a bunch of crazy guys with high horsepower that are just going to send it, and
Yep.
keeping the crowd, everybody always wants to get close. And,
Yep.
You see that in Mexico, you see that at KOH, you see that at the rock crawls, and balancing that and safety has, for all of us, has always been an issue. What was it like in those early years trying to keep people where they were supposed to be?
So in the beginning, most times, I'd say the first few years, most times we would show up at a park, we would cut these new hills, and I was always drawn to keeping the hill natural and not any dirt work, and, cut a new path, whether it was a bounty hill or a race hill. We'd cut a new path, and we would keep the spectators back on each side of the hill, but they would be in the woods. For the most part, you had to have a UTV or an off-road vehicle to get to where we were going to race at. The horsepower, the biggest thing that kept changing was the ability of these rigs and the horsepower that they were going to. In the beginning, we didn't have gigantic 1,000+ horsepower engines. So it was a lot different than what it is now. But around year 4, 5, 6, in my mind, I seen where it was going and my vision of where I was trying to take it. So I started developing at parks that I knew would be interested to create an environment that was more like a stadium, natural stadium. And where I'm sitting now, I'm at the bottom of a hill that no matter where you're sitting, you're going to see everything really good. Bikini Bottoms was one of those. I think we started doing this event here in 2014. So we started creating natural valleys where the spectators would be like on one side of the valley, the buggies and the pits would be in the bottom or to the side of the bottom, and then the hill climb would be on the opposite side. It also made recoveries a lot easier because at that point, when you're less trees and not in a forest, they're, like you said, they go back to the bottom, which makes recoveries easy. Sometimes when you're in the forest, the recoveries can become very difficult and time consuming because they'll land in the trees in weird ways. But the spectator thing and the safety thing was something that I seen had to change as the buggy started creating horsepower of 1,000+. At that point, you can sling a rock a pretty long ways. So, it went from our fan base and our spectators being all up and down the sides of the hills to the bottom. The flip side of that was I knew to grow past the point of being off-road only fan base, I had to get to what we call pavement princesses to show up and be able to come watch the event without having an off-road vehicle. I kind of put it as your NASCAR type fan base that just likes to show up, enjoy the day, sitting under a canopy in a chair and watching high horsepower do stupid things. I feel like NASCAR's probably biggest growth was because of the crashes for a lot of people. True. It wasn't something I followed, so I didn't know. But that was what was fortunate about this sport, and not really anything that was planned or whatever. It was a group of guys that were going to do it anyway, and we wanted to bring in organization, safety, and a way for people to come watch it and create income for off-road parks to keep them alive. And, over the years, we've slowly tried to develop and adapt over to a bigger fan base like that. And that we have been fortunate that it is a spectator sport. It's very spectator friendly. And it's rare that somebody comes along and finds the sport and doesn't start following it.
True.
I think our reach, some of our years, I think the last time I went through and put it all together, we were at, I think 2020 is the last time I even done it because, again, I'm not a promoter. 299 million people, unique viewers, watched 300 or 400 million views or minutes viewed, which to me is huge numbers.
Very true. So expanding and trying to do the 3 series, and with everybody going to all 3 series, is it still broken up into 3 series, or is it more just like now you have a 12 race or however many races?
No, as of this is the first year, but as of this year, we just made it a 10 race season under the National Rock Racing. We do still use the 3 regional logos just because they're recognizable. But it's just a National Rock Racing series at this point that's all 10 races together. And we've been at a 10 race format for I think 5 years, maybe 6 years, or even longer. The beginning was 4, then it was 5, then it was 7, and then it grew into 10 after that. So heck, it's probably been 7 or 8 years, maybe 9 years since we've been at a 10 race season.
Okay. And
it flies by.
And is it for somebody to win a championship, do they have to go to all 10 events, or is it like the best 8 out of 10, or how's it formatted?
No, as of 3 years ago, it's the highest points for all 10 races. The first year we went to, we dropped the worst 2 for everybody. The next year we dropped the worst 1. And this just gave drivers time to develop and be able to expand their programs into making 10 races. And the last several years, it's been all 10, whoever's got the most points for all 10 races.
And who have been some of the biggest names over the years?
As far as the beginning, Bobby Tanner and Peter Basler were always neck and neck. Matter of fact, Bobby had it won 2 years in a row, but refused to be a racer and still wanted to put on a show for the crowd and was able to give it away. Peter Basler started in the beginning in an Ultra 4 car, and done very well with it. And then Tim Cameron has been probably the biggest name that a lot of people know as the guy that was a winner. He's always been a guy that had the ability, the opportunity, and the dedication to put together a program to win year after year after year. So, in my mind, the biggest ones out there are probably Bobby Tanner, Tim Cameron. And the thing is, the cool thing about it is they're also the guys that started it. I think Randall Key, this may be his last event. He's been there since day one as well. But he's a lot of these guys are getting older just like I am, and it's tough. But as far as the biggest winner, Tim Cameron, I think, won 8 years in a row, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, Tim is he seems to be quite the wheel man. If he puts his mind to it, he could probably race just about anything.
Yes, but the truth is, rock bouncing is his passion, and he's very good at it. And there's people that can beat Tim Cameron. He's not unbeatable, but there's been very few people that's been able to beat him consistently. Last year, I think Wade Good won 6 of the 10. And I guess one of the things that comes along with that is Tim has always had the ability to stay calm towards the end of the year. And I watch a lot of these other drivers, if they're in the lead towards the end of the year or really neck and neck with Timmy, they would start making mistakes or start pulling back and quit doing the things that they were doing to get to that point. Just from, the pressure. It's for a lot of these guys, the pressure is tough by the time you get down to the last 2 or 3 races. And I've seen a lot of guys just give it away at the end.
Kind of nuke themselves.
Yep. Well, and they get to where they're holding back, because they're afraid they're going to crash and cost everything. So, Timmy's always been very good about working well under pressure. I've seen Timmy on some of our longer courses. I've seen Timmy make a mistake early on. And from that moment on, he pushes so hard that he looks like he's out of control. But that's where he actually does very well, is under pressure like that.
Okay. And the technology that we've seen, it seemed like to me, as an outsider looking in and having actually never been to an event, is that everybody thought, well, we'll just throw as much horsepower as we can at it and try to make it up the hills.
So the way it has developed and changed and started, here's how it really went, in my perspective. These guys came from a rock crawling background. A lot of these guys actually started with cab trucks and just didn't care. They were just going to go after it, and whatever happened. So that's where their driving mentality came from, or rail buggies. But as far as the buggies themselves and the technology, a lot of them started and the fabricators that were building them were rock crawlers that had very little up travel and a lot of down travel. So early on, these rock bouncers didn't have a lot of up travel, which gave them the name rock bouncers, because they were built like rock crawlers, but they were getting faster and faster and getting more competitive all over how fast can we do it, or can we make it up that ledge or over that rock or whatever. And then over time, the horsepower started growing, but then they also started finding ways to build race cars. In the beginning, these guys didn't build those rock bouncers to compete. They were built to go out and play on the hill. And then the series kept growing and people started building faster and faster rock bouncers. And so it started developing. And Timmy was one of the first ones to start developing more of a race car. It didn't matter what it looked like. It was built to perform. Everything about it was to get it lighter, to get it faster, to get more suspension. And it started developing really fast in that direction. the crazy thing about that is people thought that our hills got easier, but it didn't. It actually got really more difficult for me to find that fine line of a hill that was difficult, but not impossible, that still put on a show, but not impossible. And for an example, the hill called Showtime in Hot Springs. Timmy was the only one to climb that hill for probably 2 or 3 years, if I remember. And just probably 4 or 5 years ago, we ran a UTV event on it. Maybe 4 years ago, we ran a UTV event on it, and they climbed it in 15 seconds. And it. But even new UTV drivers that had never been there, that had come along, like Paul Wolf, they looked at it and thought, they were going to have a hard day that day. And then after the fact, they shot up it and were like, wow, that really blew me away. It surprised me that it done that. Same with the rock bouncers. Rock bouncers climb Showtime Hill in a matter of 10 seconds. That hill called Nasty Girl at Disney. If you look at that, it looks totally impossible from a normal perspective. And I think Brandon Davis ran it in, 17 seconds or something last time we were there last year. Before, nobody would have made it. I mean, it's not because the hills got easy. It's because these drivers and these machines have advanced so fast and so far. It's just changed the sport.
And so let's talk about how you integrated with Dave Cole and the KOH events.
Hot Springs is where my brain decided, hey, let's build a way to support this park. Ironically, Dave Cole ended up coming to Hot Springs. I didn't know who Dave Cole was, but I knew Knox, and Knox calls me up, which was the guy that managed the park at the time. And he calls me up and he's like, hey, I got a guy here who wants to talk to you. Tell me named Dave Cole. So Dave gets on the phone and tells me, hi, I'm Dave Cole. I have King of the Hammers out in California, and asked me, was I interested in bringing some rock bouncers out and doing a race to compete with them and do like a little shootout. And I knew immediately what the goal was to bring a crowd. But funny thing was, I'd never heard of Dave Cole. I'd never heard of King of the Hammers. And so I told him, I said, look, I'll do a little research and I'll get back with you. And, looking back, that was probably like a slap in the face to him, because he's probably, what? You don't know King of the Hammers and you're in the off-road world? The truth was, I've always been in my own world. The rock bouncing thing didn't happen because of somebody else doing something. It was because in my little mind, I thought this would be cool, and that's just kind of how I've always been. But we make it happen. It goes very well. Me and Dave become friends. And later that night, after the race was over and everything went great and people seemed to enjoy it and have a good time, and Dave looks at me, he's like, man, would you think we can get some of these guys out to California? I said, I don't know, we can try. And that's kind of how it all happened.
And what was it like that first time going out to KOH and seeing in the crowds and everything?
It was awesome to see. I'll be honest with you, I missed the days of Bobby Tanner and all of those big names being out there and putting on a show. One of the coolest things about the first event that most people probably don't realize is we didn't have a whole lot of rock bouncers come, but we wanted to make our presence known as a group. So Bobby Tanner had agreed to let a couple of people drive his rock bouncer just so it would be more than just Bobby competing with that buggy. And one of the guys that was supposed to race backed out. So CJ, my son, who at the time was 14 years old, Bobby gives him a chance to drive it. And so he does. And that was the coolest part about the first event for me, was watching my son get into a full-blown rock bouncer and give it a go in front of all those people. And he almost backed out himself because he was scared to death. He's like, Dad, there's a lot of people here. I don't know if I can do this. And I'm like, don't worry about it, CJ. Just get out there, ignore that anybody's out there, and do what you normally do and hit the hill. And he couldn't even reach the pedals because he was, probably 5 feet tall at the time. And Trip rode with him, and they got to the first waterfall, jumped right up it, got to the second waterfall, and got hung up on the back axle. And Trip had to shift for him back and forth. And he would literally slide down in the seat so he could push the gas pedal all the way down. And that's how he done it. He couldn't even see over the steering wheel. But that was really cool. And I always, I thought it was a really good thing of bringing attention from the West Coast to our little sport.
Excellent. You've really done a great job at your media and live show and stuff. Talk about the development of that.
So back, I guess it was 14 or 15, Discovery Channel hit me up, and it was the same company that was doing American Chopper and all those guys. And, they were really knocking my door down wanting to do a reality show. But I refused to let them come in and just take over. So looking back, it probably would have made a big difference in the sport. But what I was afraid of was at that time, we were already seeing American Chopper and stuff implode and kill the industry of the motorcycle and the chopper world. I knew the sport wasn't old enough to survive any kind of implosion like that. So I refused to let them just come in and create drama. And, they kind of wanted to script it. And so I refused it. And I went back and forth for probably 8-9 months. And during that process, more production companies figured out what was going on. What I did is I went to the drivers and tried to take it all of us in as a group, to be fair. Looking back, probably wasn't the best idea, because what happened was some drivers didn't like to do it one way or felt like they should have got more. And I probably should have looked at it a little different. But anyway, after the fact, I gave up on that idea. I was done with it. I'm not going down this road. But you know what? It's important that we get our own television show. So I told myself I was going to figure out a way to go live. At the time, YouTube and Facebook were starting to allow live feeds. But mainly I was focusing on YouTube. And I already had Mad Ram 11 and Busted Knuckle, who came to all the events. And so I bought 3 HughesNet satellites. Pretty naive, to be honest with you. But what I did, I ain't gonna lie, I Googled HDMI wireless transmitter. Found some for $200-$300. I'm like, okay, let me see if I can get a video from a park in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone service to the world live, and then I'll figure out how to deal with the rest of it if I can just get this video from here to there. So I bought 3 HughesNet satellites, and in my mind at the time, I was going to use 1 satellite for each channel. Mad Ram 11, Busted Knuckle, and my own. As I start developing some of that stuff, I start learning about a technology called bonding. And at the time, it wasn't really happening anywhere, but there were a couple of companies playing with it. And one of them was called LiveView. And at the time, and even now, I looked at it as, okay, I'm not going to be somebody that these people know. The truth is, it's going to be a nobody for them. But I hit them up, and everybody I kept calling told me that you can't bond satellites because it doesn't work. The latencies are too far off, yada, 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 nerd stuff. So LiveView says, you know what? I think we can do it. I'll send you a box. You see if it'll work. And this box is like $12,000. We'll send you a box, and I'm headed to Hammers. And I decide I'm going to take it to Hammers. I'm going to take the 3 satellites to Hammers with me, and we're going to give it a shot and try to be live at Hammers. So I drive out to Hammers, and I sit out there, and I've got these 3 satellites, and I don't know if you've ever tried to dial in a satellite or install a satellite. You move it 1/16 of an inch, and up there it's moving like, 10 miles. So I'm trying to dial in this satellite to point at the one in space, and I'm getting aggravated. I can't make a phone call from Hammers to talk to anybody. So I go back and forth all week. I finally give up, frustrated, and all week I would go out to the cell phone bush, make a phone call, wait for that company to call the HughesNet and come back to me. Long story short, on the way home, or we were getting ready to leave, I called him up, and I said, man, I never could get these things to work. And he goes, well, you're probably going to be mad at me, but I know why. And I said, why? He said, well, I didn't realize you were going to be that far west with the satellite, so Texas was about as far west as they were going to show you receiving. I was like, oh. So yeah, I mean, that was a little slap in the face. So he says, look, the best thing to do is you need to study to become a satellite installer. That way you can call into the tech line. We'll just give you a company ID number here. You won't be an employee, but they'll think you're an employee. Okay. So my buddy Jack, that's still with me at the Spider Off-Road, he drives all the way home. I study for 24 hours, and I take these tests, and I become a national satellite installer so that I can cross this bridge better at my first event in February. So that's how it went. We get it up and going. The bonding works great. So at this point, I'm like, okay, I can do a little more. And the bonding service also offered a cloud service that would let me point it wherever I wanted to point it once I got it in the cloud. So that's how Rock Racing TV was born, which we still do a lot of today. We still do live feeds for Ultra 4, Mid-America, and things like that. And, so we've kind of become a big part of that side of it for those guys. But that's why it was born. I mean, I got something in my mind, and I'm bad about not letting go until I figure it out, and most of my friends bet big money it'd never happen.
Right.
But I don't quit easy.
So you're still your plans, the National Rock Racing is going to continue on for whenever?
We're finishing up our 13th year now, and I'll be honest with you, the series at this point is bigger than me. It's bigger than what I can probably go any bigger than what it is on my own. So I'm at a point I would love to figure out how to get it to the next step. I feel like some people say short course is the biggest secret in off-road, but I don't believe that. As you just mentioned, this sport is very spectator friendly. It brings eyeballs. And if I could ever find a way to get to that next step of televised eyeballs and support, I think that's when this sport will truly take off to the next level. But as you know, as a promoter, it's tough to do it all. I don't have a full-blown team of staff to get social media done and handle the logistics on the back end and handle setting up agreements with parks and schedule and calendar and, making sponsorship agreements. Because the truth is, I was terrible at that job, still am. So yeah, I mean, I'm still going to try to do everything I can do to keep it going, but I'm hoping we can find the right team to get it there.
Right, and I think that's one of the things. Like, you looking at the successes in off road, and at least from the events side of it, when you look at everything that's done. Everything from Score or desert racing to the rock bouncing to rock racing to Ultra 4 to the rock crawling. The organization that seems to be volatile but always seems to be growing is Ultra 4 or is KOH. And now it's expanded into Ultra 4 with Mid-America and the Robinettes, and I think that that it's finally that there's the financing behind it. I think that one of the things that we've all dealt with over the years is limited resources to make happen what we wanted to make happen. And we all had really grand ideas and plans, but that we were always facing that proverbial brick wall of the financing and being able to afford what we wanted to do.
Well, and the truth is, I've had a tremendous amount of support from the off-road industry and the companies in that industry. But the truth of the picture is those companies don't have the budgets or the ability to get it to where it really needs to be on the next platform.
True.
And I guess the biggest advantage that this sport has over all the rest is it is spectator friendly. You can sit in one place and watch it live, just like you can drag racing. And that was one of the battles that I've always fought, is being over here on the East Coast. I never really, most of the West Coast companies, which is where a lot of the off-road industry is located, never really seen us as a real sport or as something that was interesting to them. One of the biggest things I learned, even in the sponsorship world, is the fact is it doesn't matter what your numbers are for most of those people. It doesn't matter about any of that. It's about who you know, plain and simple. It's because the guy that owns this off-road industry business, his grandson or his son's involved in this sport, and that's why he focuses on it. there are some sports that are televised that gets 0 eyeballs, um, but yet they're sponsored by Red Bull or any of those other brands, and it's usually because there's a personal connection there. But being on the East Coast and being from Mississippi or whatever on this side of the river, I think has probably been one of the hardest obstacles to conquer for our sport.
Are you working with Mid America?
Yes. I've been at Mid America since one of his very first events. The truth is, I feel like rock bouncing is probably one of the sports that, got him noticed and put him on the map.
Right.
But yes, I still work with those guys doing production. I was just at Disney last weekend doing production for Ultra 4. The weekend before that, I was at the park at Mid America doing the Mid America short course production. So, yeah, I still work really close with them as far as the production side. Our finals are there in a couple of weeks coming up for my series.
Excellent. And let's talk about family. You've got some kids. You've mentioned CJ, wife, and the rest of your life.
So I've got 3 kids. My youngest daughter, Zaylee. She's 15 years old. She'll be here this weekend. It's close to home, but she's still in school, so she doesn't have the ability to travel with me all the time. My oldest daughter, Garion, is married to Taylor. Taylor is now, and when I first started doing the live feed, I had to build it where I could do all of it myself. So I was in the trailer trying to do this live feed, running the event from a radio, running scoring from the trailer, and doing actual production myself, producing myself. Well, Taylor and my daughter, Taylor now does the production. My daughter runs the pits. My oldest daughter, Gary, and she runs the pits and keeps people organized and in place and ready to go at the line. So my son also had a baby, I guess 5 years ago. So before that, he was racing. But once he had a baby, he kind of faded away and focused on that for a while. He does miss it. But the truth is, he's very competitive, and he doesn't want to do it unless he can build a competitive rig. And I wasn't at a point where I could afford to put him in one. So he's focused on his little girl, but he'll be there this weekend since we're, only a couple hours from home. So the sport's always been a family adventure. My fiance, Crystal, she's one of the camera people out there on the course running the camera. And, I've got a couple other people, ironically, Knock, Road Park, Hot Springs, that put me in touch with Dave, is also a guy that comes and helps for these events. And then just really good people like Bill, we consider him part of the family. I took him to Egypt with me when I had the opportunity to take my mom over there to Israel and Egypt. So it's all family. I guess my son's 25 years old. My oldest daughter's 21 or 22. I'm terrible at those type of numbers, but we do it as a family, and family is very important to me. And we try to travel as much as we can together, and we usually try to take one big family trip a year, somewhere cool.
Excellent. Well, is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't discussed? Anything that that you want to let people know about?
Man, I think we've pretty much covered my life. It's the truth is, it's nothing fancy, nothing that I find out of the ordinary. It's just what I've always done and enjoy doing. And I guess that's where I'm blessed and fortunate is I've always found a way to create opportunities to make a living in something I enjoy. I've never been the guy that went out and chased $1 million job. To me, my freedom and doing what I enjoy is the most valuable thing to me.
Yeah, I get that completely. Before I found the rock crawling and putting on and promoting events, I never had a career, whether it was my own doing or somebody else that I worked for, that I did for more than 5 years.
Yeah, well, like I said before, I had that job at Piggly Wiggly for 4 years. And ever since I was 19 years old, I've never had a real job. So pretty much my entire life, I've never had a real job. I've always been self-employed. and I just go after it. If I fail, I try again a different way, but I do whatever I can to go after it and enjoy life. Most days are, or I'd say for me, all days are positive. I just don't. I don't waste a whole lot of time on negative in life. I find the good in everything.
Excellent. That's awesome. I was going to ask you for a quote or a motto or something like that, but I think that was a pretty good segue right there.
I guess. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm just a country boy from Mississippi trying to figure out how to make it in this world.
There you go. That could be a song. I think it might be a song.
It won't be me singing it.
You're going to spare us that, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Clyde, thank you so much for spending the time. I know you're putting together an event right now. It got in a little rain, but I appreciate you taking the time and talking to me today.
Well, man, I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully I'll get out there to see some Trail Hero stuff one of these years.
Yeah, that's my son's event. You're talking about how old kids are. He's 40 now, or will be 40 here shortly. And
I'm fixing to click 50.
Yeah, and that just amazes me in itself. I can remember when he got his nickname Little Rich, running through the shop, and my guys that were working for me as a landscape contractor were, calling me and, hey, Rich, and he'd come running, and they said, oh, no, if we call Little Rich, we're calling you.
Yeah, I stopped by and had lunch with your son. I guess it was about 4 months ago.
Excellent.
So
cool. Well, Clyde, thank you so much, and I'll let you know when this airs, and we'll see each other again here shortly.
Thank you, man.
All right, you take care.
All
Have a good day. Bye-bye. Well, that's another episode of Conversations with Big Rich. I'd like to thank you all for listening. If you could do us a favor and leave us a review on any podcast service that you happen to be listening on, or send us an email or a text message or a Facebook message, and let me know any ideas that you have, or if there's anybody that you have that you think would be a great guest, please forward the contact information to me so that we can try to get them on. And always remember, live life to the fullest. Enjoying life is a must. Follow your dreams and live life with all the gusto you can. Thank you.